Psychological viewpoint stressed that there were so many emotional problems that could not be attributed to any organic disorder. These approaches emphasize on psychological, interpersonal, social, and cultural factors in explanation and treatment of abnormality. Explanation psychological approaches to abnormality consider the influence of our thoughts, emotions, relationships, and culture in understanding and treating emotional problems. They emphasize psychological and social factors going beyond physical causes. These approaches focus on how our thoughts, feelings, and interactions contribute to our mental well-being. By considering these factors, psychologists provide explanations and treatments that extend beyond medical or biological approaches.
मनोवैज्ञानिक दृष्टिकोण बताते हैं कि असामान्यता की समस्याएं कई बार किसी शारीरिक समस्या से नहीं होती। इन दृष्टिकोणों में मनोयोग्यता के कारण और सामाजिक परिस्थितियों के प्रभाव को ध्यान में रखा जाता है। यहाँ भावनाएं, विचार और संवाद का महत्वपूर्ण योगदान होता है जिससे असामान्यता को समझा और उपचार किया जा सकता है।
1.4 When early psychological approaches began with the moral and mental hygiene movement, which advocated humane and responsible care of the institutionalized patients, and encouraged and reinforced social interaction with them. Mental hygiene movement started with the concept of moral therapy. Pioneers in the mental reforms were P. Pinel 1745-1826, William Tuke 1732-1822, Benjamin Rush 1745-1813, and Dorothea Dix 1802-1887. All these individuals were the pioneers in the mental hygiene movement, which led to asylum reforms in Europe and America. In Europe during the Middle Ages, mentally ill and mentally retarded, commonly called as the lunatics and idiots, aroused little interest and were given marginal care. Disturbed behavior was considered to be the responsibility of the family rather than the community or the state. In the 1600s and 1700s, insane asylums were established. Early asylums were little more than human warehouses, but as the 19th century began, the moral treatment movement led to improved conditions in at least some mental hospitals. Founded on a basic respect for human dignity and the belief that humanistic care would help to relieve mental illness, moral treatment reform efforts were instituted by leading mental health professionals of the time. In the middle of the 1800s, Dorothea Dix argued that treating the mentally ill in hospitals was to be more humane and more economical than caring for them haphazardly in their communities. She urged that special facilities be provided to house mental patients. The creation of large institutions for the treatment of mental patients led to the development of a new profession of psychiatry. By the middle of the 1800s, superintendents of asylums for the insane were almost always physicians who were experienced in taking care of people with severe mental disorders. The Association of Medical Superintendents of American Institutions for the Insane, AMSAII, which later became the American Psychiatric Association, APA. In 1844 and 1833, the state of Massachusetts opened a public-supported asylum for the people with mental disorders in Worcester. Samuel Woodward, the asylum's first superintendent, also became the first president of the AMSAII. Woodward claimed that mental disorders could be cured just like other types of illnesses. Treatment at the Worcester Lunatic Hospital included a blend of physical and moral procedures. Explanation during the Middle Ages, mentally ill and mentally disabled individuals, commonly referred to as lunatics and idiots, received little attention and marginal care. Their disturbed behavior was seen as the responsibility of their families rather than the community or the state. In the 1600s and 1700s, insane asylums were established, but they were often mere warehouses for people with mental illness. However, as the 19th century began, the moral treatment movement brought about improvements in some mental hospitals. The moral and mental hygiene movement emerged, advocating for compassionate and responsible care for institutionalized patients. It emphasized the importance of social interaction with patients. Key figures in this movement were P. Pinnell, William Tuke, Benjamin Rush, and Dorothea Dix. They played a significant role in bringing about reforms in asylums in Europe and America. In the mid-1800s, Dorothea Dix argued for the need to treat mentally ill individuals in hospitals, as it would be more humane and cost-effective compared to haphazard care in the community. She advocated for the establishment of specialized facilities to house mental patients. This led to the development of large institutions for mental health care and the emergence of the psychiatric profession. During this time, superintendents of asylums were often physicians experienced in caring for individuals with severe mental disorders. The Association of Medical Superintendents of American Institutions for the Insane, AMSAII, later known as the American Psychiatric Association, APA, was founded in 1844 and 1833. The state of Massachusetts opened a publicly supported asylum in Worcester for people with mental disorders. Samuel Woodward, the first superintendent of the asylum, also became the first president of the AMSAII. Woodward believed that mental disorders could be cured like other illnesses, and treatment at the Worcester Lunatic Hospital involved a combination of physical and moral approaches.
जिन्हें मानसिक बीमारियां होती थी, उनकी देखभाल के लिए पहले काफी संघर्ष किया गया था। फिर एक मार्गदर्शक आंदोलन शुरू हुआ जिसमें मानवीयता और मानसिक स्वच्छता की बात की गई। इस आंदोलन ने संगठित रूप से संपर्क करके मानसिक बीमारियों वाले रोगियों की देखभाल को मजबूती दी और सामाजिक संपर्क को बढ़ावा दिया। इसे मानसिक स्वच्छता आंदोलन कहा जाता है। मानसिक स्वच्छता आंदोलन की शुरुआत नैतिक चिकित्सा की अवधारणा के साथ हुई। नैतिक चिकित्सा के प्रमुख प्रवर्तकों में पी. पिनल 1745-1826, विलियम ट्यूक 1732-1822, बेंजामिन रश 1745-1813 और डोरोथिया डिक्स 1802-1887 शामिल थे। ये सभी लोग मानसिक स्वच्छता आंदोलन के प्रमुख थे जिसने यूरोप और अमेरिका में आश्रय सुधारों को बढ़ावा दिया। मध्ययुग में यूरोप में मानसिक बीमार और मानसिक विकलांग, आमतौर पर पागल और अविवेकी कहे जाते थे, को किसी खास ध्यान की जरूरत नहीं थी और उन्हें मार्जिनल देखभाल मिलती थी। बदहवासी को परिवार की जिम्मेदारी माना जाता था, बल्कि समुदाय या राज्य की जिम्मेदारी नहीं। 1600 और 1700 के दशक में पागल अस्पताल स्थापित किए गए, लेकिन इनिशियल अस्पताल बस मानवीय संग्रहालय से कम नहीं थे। लेकिन जब 19वीं सदी शुरू हुई तो नैतिक उपचार आंदोलन ने कम से कम कुछ मानसिक अस्पताल
1.4. Two psychoanalytic approach psychoanalysis was pioneered by Sigmund Freud 1856-1939. He learned the art of hypnosis from France. He experimented with somewhat different procedures of hypnosis. He used hypnosis in an innovative way. He encouraged his patients to talk freely about their problems, conflicts, and fears. He discovered the unconscious mind and its influence in psychopathology by using the techniques of free association, dream analysis, and Freudian slips. Freud emphasized on internal mental processes and childhood experiences. The core elements of this approach include Analysis of mental structures. B. Levels of consciousness. C. Stages of psychosexual development. D. Anxiety and defense mechanisms. E. Psychoanalytic therapy. Analysis of mental structures. The human psyche consists of the ID, the ego, and the superego. The thoughts, attitudes, and behaviors of three are in state of conflict called intrapsychic conflict. The ID is the unorganized reservoir of wishes or passions related to our sexual and aggressive drives. It strives for immediate gratification that bypasses demands of reality, order, logic, and reason. The ID is like a child. When it wants something, it wants it there and then without regard for consequences, so ID operates on pleasure principle. The energy within the ID is labeled as the libido. The ID has its own characteristic way of processing information, cognitive style referred as primary process. The thinking patterns of ID are illogical, irrational, emotional, immature, and purely selfish. Selfish and dangerous drives of the ID do not go unchecked, and the ego ensures that we must find ways to meet our basic needs without offending everyone around us. The ego operates according to the reality principle, and the cognitive operations of the ego are characterized by logic, reason, and are referred as the secondary process. The ego tries to resolve conflicts between the demands of the ID within the permitted boundaries of superego. The ego has the role to mediate conflict between the ID and the superego according to realities of the world. If it mediates successfully, we see an individual who is well adjusted, while if the ego is unsuccessful, either the ID or the superego becomes strong. If the superego is strong, we see a pure, rigid, non-flexible individual. Superego is the storehouse of moral and ethical standards taught by parents, teachers, and culture. It also refers to the conscience of the psyche. It operates according to the moral principle. When we do something wrong and ethical and moral standards are violated, the superego generates guilt. B. Levels of consciousness. Freud describes three different layers of consciousness: conscious, preconscious, per second, subconscious, and unconscious. According to Freud, that part of the mind about which we are aware is consciousness. It is placed where the ego resides, but it is a small part of mental life. The preconscious comprises of thoughts or activities that are easily made conscious by an effort to remember. The largest segment is the unconscious, which comprise the ID, is not easily reachable, yet it gives rise on to important needs and influences our behavior. The superego resides at all the three levels of consciousness. Along with the mental structure, levels of consciousness describe the Freudian topographical structure of personality. See stages of psychosexual development. Freud theorized that during childhood we pass through a number of psychosexual stages of development. Each stage of development represents a specific period of development where our basic needs arise. And an under or over gratification of the needs at any stage leaves a strong impression on the individual in form of a fixation or psychopathology reflected throughout the adult life. In each of these stages, energy of sexual instinct, libido, is situated in different parts of the body. Oral stage, birth to 2 years. In the oral stage, the major source of pleasure is the mouth, where the infant sucks, bites, through mouth. Any fixation at this stage appears in form of nail biting, chewing pencils, paper, etc., smoking cigarettes. Anal stage, 2 to 3 years. In the anal stage, which extends from 2 to 3 years, toilet training begins. Any conflict or fixation at this stage appears in form of a person who is very neat, clean, and strict in following rules norms. Phallic stage, 3 to 5 years. Phallic stage begins at 3 years and goes up to 5 years. In this stage, boys have Oedipal complex, a wish to have sexual attachment with their mothers, while girls shift away from mother and get closer to father, an experience labeled as Electra complex. Latency 5 to 12 years in this stage, sex drives are subsided and child is mainly engaged in acquiring social, academic, and professional skills. Genital 12 years and onwards latency stage is where interest in sexual drive is less, but it is the genital stage where interest in and tendency to impress opposite sex develops. One is more preoccupied to make a good impression on the members of opposite sex through one's looks, dress, and conversation. Often you see a young growing up standing in front of the mirror and either trying to focus how to look even better, etc. Each stage of development is important for a healthy adjustment, and fixation at any stage may result in formation of psychopathology or an immediate behavior. De-anxiety and defense mechanisms. Freud noted that a major drive for most people is the reduction in tension, and that a major cause of tension was anxiety. He identified 3 different types of anxiety. Reality anxiety. This is the most basic form of anxiety and is typically based on fears of real and possible events, such as being bitten by a dog or falling from a ladder. The most common way of reducing tension from reality anxiety is taking oneself away from the situation, running away from the dog, or simply refusing to go up the ladder. Neurotic anxiety. This is a form of anxiety which comes from an unconscious fear that the basic impulses of the ID, the primitive part of our personality, will take control of the person, leading to eventual punishment. This is thus a form of moral anxiety. Moral anxiety. This form of anxiety comes from a fear of violating values and moral codes and appears as feelings of guilt or shame. The ego is always threatened by the possibility of expression of irrational and antisocial sexual and aggressive drives of the ID. Thus, the ego fights a battle to stay on top of ID and superego. The conflicts between ID and superego produce anxiety that is a threat to ego. The threat or anxiety experienced by ego is a signal that alerts the ego to use unconscious protective processes that keep primitive emotions associated with conflicts in check. These protective processes are defense mechanisms or coping styles. All defense mechanisms share 2 common properties. They often appear unconsciously and they tend to distort, transform, or otherwise falsify reality. In distorting reality, there is a change in perception which allows for a lessening of anxiety with a corresponding reduction in felt tension. Freud's list of basic defense mechanisms includes denial, claiming, believing that what is true to be actually false. Displacement, redirecting emotions to a substitute target. Intellectualization, taking an objective viewpoint. Projection, attributing uncomfortable feelings to others. Rationalization, creating false but credible justifications. Reaction, formation, overacting in the opposite way to the fear. Regression, going back to acting as a child. Repression, pushing uncomfortable thoughts into the subconscious. Sublimation, redirecting wrong urges into socially acceptable actions. Psychoanalytic therapy. Psychoanalytic therapy involves reliving repressed fantasies and fears both in feeling and in thought. This process involves transference, i.e., a projection of the attitudes and emotions originally directed towards the parents onto the analyst. This is necessary for successful treatment. Access to these repressed fears is gained often through dream interpretation, where the manifest content in dreams is understood as a symbolic expression of the hidden or latent content. Internal censorship demands that the wish be transformed, leading to a disguised or symbolic representation. The sources of dream content results from lost memories, linguistic symbols, and repressed experiences. Dreams are guardians of sleep, i.e., wish fulfillments that arise in response to inner conflicts and tensions whose function is to allow the subject to continue sleeping. Dream work is the production of dreams during sleep, the translation of demands arising from the unconscious into symbolic objects of the preconscious and eventually the conscious mind of the subject. Dream interpretation is the decoding of the symbol's manifest content and the recovery of their latent content, i.e., the unconscious and, hence, hidden tensions and conflicts that give rise to the dreams in the first place. Evaluation. Some of the criticisms typically raised against the Freudian theory are: 1. Freud's hypotheses are neither verifiable nor falsifiable. It is not clear what would count as evidence sufficient to confirm or refute theoretical claims. 2. The theory is based on an inadequate conceptualization of the experience of women. 3. The theory overemphasizes the role of sexuality in human psychological development and experience. Explanation 1. 4. 2. Psychoanalytic approach. The psychoanalytic approach was developed by Sigmund Freud, who used innovative techniques like hypnosis and free association to understand the human mind. Freud discovered the unconscious mind, which influences our thoughts and behavior. He focused on internal mental processes and childhood experiences. According to Freud, the human psyche consists of 3 parts: the ID, ego, and superego. These parts are in conflict with each other, and this conflict affects our thoughts, attitudes, and behaviors. The ID represents our basic desires and operates on the pleasure principle, seeking immediate gratification without considering consequences. The ego mediates between the ID and the superego, operating on the reality principle. It tries to resolve conflicts and balance our desires with societal norms. The superego represents our moral standards and conscience, influenced by societal values and teachings. Freud described 3 levels of consciousness: conscious, preconscious, subconscious, and unconscious. The unconscious mind contains hidden desires and influences our behavior without our awareness. Freud proposed stages of psychosexual development, where our basic needs and desires are focused on different body parts. Fixation or over-under gratification at any stage can lead to psychological issues later in life. Psychoanalysis also explores anxiety and defense mechanisms. Anxiety arises from different sources, and defense mechanisms help the ego cope with anxiety by distorting reality. Some common defense mechanisms include denial, displacement, intellectualization, projection, rationalization, reaction formation, regression, repression, and sublimation. Psychoanalytic therapy involves exploring repressed emotions and fantasies, often through dream analysis and transference. Dreams are seen as symbolic expressions of hidden conflicts and tensions. Critics argue that Freud's theories are difficult to prove or disprove and may not fully account for women's experiences. They also suggest that his theory overemphasizes the role of sexuality in human development and experiences. Overall, the psychoanalytic approach has contributed to our understanding of the human mind and its complexities.
मनोवैज्ञानिक दृष्टिकोण का संस्थापक सिगमंड फ्रॉइड 1856-1939 थे। उन्होंने फ्रांस से हाइप्नोसिस की कला सीखी। उन्होंने हाइप्नोसिस के कुछ अलग तरीकों का प्रयोग किया। वे अपने रोगियों को स्वतंत्र रूप से उनकी समस्याओं, संघर्षों और भयों के बारे में बात करने को प्रोत्साहित किया। उन्होंने मनस्थापना, स्वप्न विश्लेषण और फ्रॉइडियन स्लिप्स के तकनीकों का उपयोग करके अवचेतन मन और उसके प्रभाव को मानसिक विकार में खोजा। फ्रॉइड ने मनोवैज्ञानिक प्रक्रियाओं और बचपन के अनुभवों पर जोर दिया। इस दृष्टिकोण की मुख्य तत्व सम्मिलित किए जाते हैं: ए. मानसिक संरचनाओं का विश्लेषण। बी. सचेतता के स्तर। सी. मनोयौनिक विकास के चरण। डी. चिंता और रक्षा यंत्रणाएं। ई. मनोवैज्ञानिक चिकित्सा। मानसिक संरचनाओं का विश्लेषण। मनुष्य का मन 3 भागों से मिलकर बनता है: इड, ईगो और सुपरईगो। ये भाग एक दूसरे के बीच संघर्ष करते हैं और इस संघर्ष से हमारे विचार, अनुभव और व्यवहार पर असर पड़ता है। एड हमारी मूल इच्छाएं प्रतिनिधित्व करता है और ये तुरंत संतुष्टि की इच्छा से चलता है बिना परिणामों को सोचे। ईगोइड और सुपईगो के मध्यस्थ रहता है। यह वास्तविकता के सिद्धांत पर आधारित होता है और हमारी इच्छाएं सामाजिक नियमों के साथ संतुलित करने का प्रयास करता है। सुपईगो हमारे नैतिक मानकों और अंतरात्मा का प्रतिनिधित्व करता है, जो सामाजिक मूल्यों और शिक्षाओं से प्रभावित होता है। सचेतता के स्तर। फ्रॉइड ने 3 अलग सचेतता के स्तर वर्णित किए: चेतन, प्रीचेतना, अवचेतन और अवचेतन। फ्रॉइड के अनुसार वह भाग मन है जिसके बारे में हमें जागरूकता होती है। प्रीचेतना मन के तटस्थ भाग है, जिसमें विचारों या गतिविधियों की स्वतंत्र याद द्वारा आसानी से जागरूक किया जा सकता है। सबसे बड़ा भाग अवचेतन है, जो इट को समायोजित करता है, लेकिन यह व्यवहार के महत्वपूर्ण जज्बातों को उत्पन्न करता है और हमारे व्यवहार को हमारे जागरूकता के बिना प्रभावित करता है। मनोयौनिक विकास के चरण। यड ने मनोयौनिक विकास के चरणों का सिद्धांत विकसित किया। इन चरणों में हमारी मूल आवश्यकताएं और इच्छाएं विभिन्न शरीर के भागों पर केंद्रित होती हैं। अगर किसी चरण पर फिक्सेशन हो जाए या उसे अधिक या कम संतुष्टि हो, तो बाद में जीवन में मानसिक समस्याएं हो सकती हैं। चिंता और रक्षा यंत्रणाएं। फ्रॉइड ने चिंता के विभिन्न प्रकारों की पहचान की। इनमें शारीरिक और भावनात्मक खौफ शामिल होते हैं। चिंता कम करने के लिए व्यक्ति अपने दिमाग को अनुसंधान करता है और वास्तविकता को बदलकर अपनी सोच को बदलता है। फ्रॉइड ने रक्षा यंत्रणाओं के बारे में भी बताया, जिन्हें व्यक्ति चिंता के साथ संघर्ष करने के लिए अपने अनुचित विचारों और भावनाओं को बदलने के लिए उपयोग करता है। मनोवैज्ञानिक चिकित्सा। मनोवैज्ञानिक चिकित्सा में अवचेतन भावनाओं और खोई हुई भावनाओं का पता लगाना शामिल होता है, जिसे अक्सर सपना विश्लेषण और ट्रांसफरेंस के माध्यम से किया जाता है। सपनों को एक संक्षेप में खुलासा करते हुए विचार की बातों का अर्थ समझा जाता है और उनमें छिपी अवचेतन तनाव और संघर्ष का पता लगाया जाता है। ये संघर्ष और तनावों के मूल कारण समझकर चिकित्सा किया जाता है, जो व्यक्ति को अधिक सकारात्मक और स्वस्थ जीवन जीने में मदद करती है।